Coming up, is Xander Bogaerts coming to Arizona? Looking at potential trade packages for the D-backs surplus of outfielders in part two with Paul Holden of Locked On Rockies.
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. I'm Millard Thomas, host of this wonderful podcast. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. If you want to see more content by me, just follow me on Twitter at CreatorThomas24 for my personal account, or just look up Locked On Diamondbacks, both Twitter, Instagram for the podcast handle. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free and available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. Also tell your friends to go hit subscribe on the Locked On Diamondbacks YouTube channel. The channel keeps growing, and I want the channel. There's no we, just I want the channel to get to at least 300 subscribers in the next couple weeks, then 500, 1,000, and keep climbing from there. So please hit subscribe on the Locked On Diamondbacks YouTube channel. Speaking of YouTube, for the YouTube audience, this video will end after we talk about the D-backs potential trade ideas. And for the audio audience, you guys will get part two with Paul Holden of Locked On Rockies. So let's jump right into the podcast, because I want to start with some rumors with the D-backs, because the D-backs have expressed interest in Xander Bogaerts. And listen, I've talked about how I'm a closet Red Sox fan on this podcast before. I love Xander Bogaerts, and the idea of the D-backs going out there and signing Bogaerts gives me the tingles. It gives me goosebumps, and I would absolutely love it. So I got 5 reasons why Xander Bogaerts to the D-backs makes sense and why the D-backs should pull the move. I don't think the D-backs will do it. I think someone else like the Padres, who are also interested, a team like the Phillies, I think those teams will pony up the money. The Red Sox, I think all of them will probably just outbid the D-backs when it comes to Xander Bogaerts. But if the D-backs are able to make a deal, or at least offer him a deal he would be happy and satisfied with, I have 5 reasons why the D-backs should go after Xander Bogaerts. So the first reason why I think the D-backs should go after Xander Bogaerts is, even though they might get outbid by these other teams, Xander Bogaerts is a tier 1 free agent, but he still won't cost tier 1 money. I think Bogaerts is as good as any shortstop in baseball. Maybe he's closer to that bottom of the tier 1, but I still think he's a tier 1 shortstop. He's coming off a career high 6.1 F4, been basically a 300, 850 OPS guy the last 5 years. You look at his career BABIP, batting average on balls in play, it sits at 336. And for his career, he's got a strikeout rate under 20%. So this is someone that got some power, usually around 20 to 25 home runs, high average, RBI producer, run producer, puts the ball in play, doesn't strike out. He does everything you want, long at bats, just great at taking pitches. He's a true pro when he's at the plate. And honestly, if you look at him offensively, if you look at just the counting stats, he's basically no different than Carlos Correa. And speaking of Correa, he's someone that when you look at his contract, he's making like $35 million a year right now. Trey Turner, Spotrac has Trey Turner projected to make about $33.5 million annually on his next deal this free agency. Bogaerts is only projected $29.5 million, and he's projected to get a 6-year deal. So $29.5 million over 6 years. That might sound like a lot, but considering Trey Turner's projected $33.5 annually over 7 years, and then you look at guys like Seager, Lindor, Rendon, all those guys are making between 32 and 35, and all of them are on 7+ year deals. So if I could get Bogaerts for less money and less years, I think that's a great deal for a guy who's tier 1, even though he might be bottom of that tier 1. Number 2, He's a poor defensive shortstop. Now, that might not seem like a good reason to go after someone to play shortstop, but he's arguably the worst defensive shortstop in baseball the last few years. If you look at defensive run save, so I think that actually makes him a perfect candidate to switch positions to either third base or second base, and preferably probably third base. Boris, his agent, Scott Boris, who we all know, the biggest mogul of all agents in baseball, he's been insistent this offseason that Bogaerts is not switching positions. And guess what? The D-backs won't ask him to for at least the first year of that deal and maybe the second. But once Jordan Lawler, the defensive wizard, gets called up, he will take Xander Bogaerts' job at shortstop. And where Bogart's getting a little bit older, he'll be in his early 30s by that point. I think it'll be easier to have that conversation. It'll be, as a veteran, he should move to a more manageable position like third base instead of shortstop. And he's also got a good physical profile to play third as well. So I think it would be a little bit easier of a conversation to have with Xander Bogaerts once he's in his early 30s, once he's getting a little bit older, and once he's watching Jordan Lawler in practice and looking at that defensive maestro, I think it would be a lot easier conversation to have with Bogaerts at that time. Number 3, he fits the timeline. Listen, not everyone on the D-backs roster can be 25 and younger, and you also don't want to sign crusty veterans clogging playing time from those positions. Bogaerts fits right in line with a Marte, who is 29 years old, Zach Gallen's in his late 20s, Christian Walker is 31, Merrill Kelly's a fresh 34. Xander Bogaerts turned 30 like a month and a half ago. Like, he's right in the prime of his career. He's a proven winner. He's a playoff performer, and he's a 10-year vet. He's a 10-year vet who's still younger than Christian Walker. So he can show the kiddos a thing or two about winning and being a professional. So I would love Xander Bogaerts because he's someone, even though he's been in the league 10 years, still fits perfectly with the D-backs timeline. Number 4, the left side of the infield just currently doesn't have a high offensive ceiling. Until Jordan Lawler is ready, the shortstop position is currently weak if the D-backs don't sign Xander Bogaerts. I like Rojas. I don't want to put any limits on Josh Rojas, but if I'm being honest, I feel like he's more of a super utility guy than an everyday third baseman. I think he's a guy who plays third base maybe 30 games, and then he plays a little second base, and then he's playing a little shortstop, and he's playing a little outfield, and he's doing a little DH. Like, I think Josh Rojas is going to be one of those guys like a Ben Zobrist that'll get 120 to 140 games played in the season and play like 3 to 4 to 5 different positions, like a Zobrist, like a Brock Holt, and be effective. Like, I think a Brock Holt was an all-star one time. I think a Ben Zobrist too. Like, being a super utility guy doesn't mean you're bad. It means you're a versatile guy. And like a guy like Josh Rojas, who has that speed skill, I think he's someone that the D-backs would want to get in the lineup for at least 100 games. So even though Bogaerts might be manning shortstop and potentially manning third once Jordan Lawler gets called up, Josh Rojas can still be playing all over the place because he's a super utility guy. And I currently just don't believe in Manuel Rivera either. So if you sign Xander Bogaerts right now, I think that would be a pretty good signing considering that left side of the infield just isn't that strong right now. So you would have Bogaerts at short. You would have that Rivera Rojas platoon over at third base for a year or two. And then once Lawler gets called up, he takes over shortstop. You move Bogaerts to third base. And now think about that left side of your infield offensively with Jordan Lawler and Bogaerts. That sounds enticing. Then the final reason why the D-backs should sign Xander Bogaerts is a real simple reason: familiarity. Mike Hazen used to work in the Red Sox front office as an assistant GM. He saw a whole bunch of Xander Bogaerts when he was over there. He knows Bogaerts is a supreme elite talent. So for those 5 reasons, the D-backs should go after Xander Bogaerts. And if you think it's a surefire bet that the D-backs are going to sign Xander Bogaerts, you need to go to betonline.net and place that bet, because BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From football to basketball to soccer and esports, we've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix in. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Now let's get back into the podcast, and I want to look at some potential trade packages for the D-backs outfielders because, Arizona Sports, Jordan Leandre. I always feel like I butcher his last name, but Jordan of Arizona Sports got 3 trade packages here. Did I say heel? Here involving the D-backs outfielders. And I just want to go through his potential trade packages because there's a whole bunch of D-backs writers, reporters, coming up with these fake trade scenarios. And I love my folks over at Arizona Sports. I think I'm still technically an employee at Arizona Sports. I always love reading their articles and seeing the kind of trades, the fake trades that they have for the D-backs. So we're going to look at Jordan's fake trades because I did find them very interesting. And we're going to see if I would do them or not. And the first fake trade that Jordan has is he's got the Blue Jays trading for Jake McCarthy in cash. The D-backs get back catcher Danny Jansen. Now, Jordan has a very compelling case to upgrade the catcher position because apparently the D-backs were 25th in framing runs and 24th in defensive runs saved. And I don't think that was all Carson Kelly, but he definitely didn't help. Also just had also had a below average offensive catcher when you look at WRC plus. So the stats for the catcher position for the D-backs defensively, offensively just wasn't very pretty. But for the D-backs, I like the trade, but I don't think I would want to trade Jake McCarthy for an offensive catcher at this time because even though Jansen had a really strong season, and if he could replicate that season, he would be a super nice addition to this D-backs team. If he had Jansen doing what he did this past year, batting like 6th or 7th or 8th for this D-backs team because they're going to be so deep next season, that would be a huge boost to this D-backs team. But defensively, it doesn't sound like he's much of an upgrade over Carson Kelly. So you're really banking on that season being replicable from what he did in 2022. But the main reason, I feel like I combined so many of my words, but the main reason I wouldn't do this is because I don't know how much of an upgrade Danny Jansen is over Carson Kelly. And also, is Carson Kelly enough of a problem where I feel like I need to trade a young outfielder? Like right now, I feel like we could still ride Carson Kelly and just have Jake McCarthy in the outfield and maybe play him a little DH. Like, I don't think Carson Kelly is becoming Buster Posey anytime soon, but I still think he can be an above average offensive catcher, a good offensive catcher, because I think we saw that not just in 2019, but I do think in 2021, he was a solid offensive catcher. And even though the advanced stats weren't pretty for Carson Kelly, I do think the eye test clearly showed the pitching staff was very comfortable with Carson Kelly. And when he was out with injury, the pitching staff, I think, clearly didn't perform the same and wasn't as good without a Carson Kelly behind the plate. So even though I don't have high expectations for Carson Kelly anymore, I've kind of taken all my expectations away from a Carson Kelly after seeing him for now, 4 years in D-backs uniform, his peak being 2019. I think all D-backs fans have recalibrated our expectations when it comes to Carson Kelly, and we're no longer expecting that potential all-star that we thought we might have had when we first acquired him. But do I think I'm ready to just go out there and trade a potential stud and a Jake McCarthy for an albeit young and rising catcher in Danny Jansen? No. Carson Kelly isn't old. He's not that much older than Danny Jansen. I still think he could be pretty solid offensively. So because of those reasons, I like the trade, but I don't think I would do it at this moment. Even though when you look at Danny Jansen's stats from last year, they're very impressive. 72 games, 15 home runs, 855 OPS. I like those stats, but I don't think it's the right trade for the D-backs at this time. Now, if we go after this season of Carson Kelly just flat out sucks again offensively, and then Jake McCarthy basically does the same season where like, oh, he's a really good outfielder, but he's maybe not like a star or anything like that, then maybe I would revisit this trade conversation in the offseason next year. But at this moment, I don't think you have to do that deal. The number 2 trade here, D-backs trade to the Detroit Tigers, Pavin Smith, and their number 14 prospect, Blaze Alexander. And the D-backs get back right-handed pitcher Joe Jimenez because according to Jordan of Arizona Sports, D-backs right-handers posted a 5.03 ERA in 2022, and they struck out fewer than 2 men per walk. So, to sum it up, D-backs righties sucked this past season, and overall, outside of Mantiply and Kyle Nelson, all the relievers sucked for the D-backs. but they desperately need a righty right now in the bullpen because they can at least get by with the two lefties that they have, but they desperately need more right-handed pitching. And Jimenez is someone that's interesting. He's coming off his best season with a 3.49 ERA, 2.0 FIP, averages around 96 miles per hour on his fastball. So I think I would do this deal for Jose or for Joe Jimenez, but I don't think I would put a Blaze Alexander in this deal. I don't think I want to give up a top 15 prospect for a reliever who finally put it together after like 5 or 6 years in Major League Baseball. If I could give up like, I don't know, the 20th, 25th best prospect in the Dbacks organization, then I think I'll do it, but not the 14th best prospect. I think I would have to bring the value down a little bit on our side first because Jimenez has always had good advanced stats, but this was the first time he put it all together and the counting stats match the advanced stats. So I just don't want to give up a top 15 guy for someone with only 1 year of proven success. And at this point, like Pavin Smith has little to no value for the D-backs. Like, listen, I will never want to disparage Pavin Smith. I will never besmirch his name. He's a friend of the pod, had him on the podcast before. So I got a soft spot for Pavin Smith, but I mean, he can't play defensively in the outfield, especially when you have Thomas, Varchel, and Carroll. Like, you have 3 superstar defensive outfielders. So it's like, why would I ever put Pavin Smith out there? Offensively, it's like he really doesn't have a great platoon advantage. He doesn't hit for power as a first baseman. He's not a great defensive first baseman either. It's like, why would you ever take Christian Walker out the lineup for Pavin Smith? Because Christian Walker, power machine, and now is the best defensive first baseman in baseball. Why would you do that? Then you look at the DH spot. It's like maybe Pavin Smith could play DH, but it's like maybe it would be Jake McCarthy. Maybe it would be the newbie Kyle Lewis. Like, there's just really not a spot for Pavin Smith on this D-backs roster currently. So I wouldn't be mad throwing him in the deal. And looking at some other numbers for Joe Jimenez, career strikeout rate of 28.6%, 20 saves and 297 appearances. So he's got a little saving experience as well. And his fastball velo this past year was his hardest since 2019. So I just think he's a perfect Brent Strom candidate who's getting better every single season. And with the D-backs in desperate need of more right-handed pitchers, I'm fine giving up someone like Pavin Smith who holds little to no value to the D-backs. Then the final trade I want to discuss is Jake McCarthy to the Miami Marlins, along with Buddy Kennedy and Edwin Uceda, and the D-backs get back Jesus Luzardo and cash considerations. And this is the deal that I do think I would do, but I don't think I would give up a Buddy and an Edwin. If I could take one of them out the deal, I would do that. But this Marlins team, we know, is starving for offensive talent. Every day on Twitter, I have to see Locked On Marlins host Peter Pratt do some fake trade for Christian Walker where we get fleeced basically as D-backs Nation. But a deal like this gives me those Jazz Chisholm for Zach Gallen vibes. And I think that's a big reason I would do it. If I could make it 1-for-1, I would, because I think Jake McCarthy is going to be a good major league player. And maybe he's not as good of a major league player as Jazz Chisholm, but he's a top 10 fastest player in baseball. When you look at sprint speed, the Marlins were not a very fast team in 2022. So you get to add that speed component to your lineup. He can, from what we've seen so far, actually hit for average. So you get a high contact guy, someone that could get on base, and you mix that with Jazz Chisholm. Those two will be wreaking havoc at the top of your lineup if you're the Marlins. And then for the D-backs, Jesus Luzardo, mid-20s, 25 years old, coming off the best season of his career, top 100 prospect that's dealt with injuries but was healthy to end the year last year, and he just looked phenomenal. He throws the curveball the most, and that's followed by a 96-mile-an-hour fastball as well. So I would love this deal. I think this is a deal where both sides win. D-backs get to stay young out of Jesus Luzardo, who I think is a perfect candidate to be a number 2 pitcher behind Zach Gallen. If I get him in the midst of a Brent Strom, I can only imagine the ceiling he could reach. So that's a deal I would definitely do if I'm the Arizona Diamondbacks.